Hello and welcome to the Night Sky Reader. I'm here with a story to help you relax, meditate, or gently drift to sleep. Tonight, Sphagnum Moss at Dusk, a fen nature sleep story. Settle in, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's begin. You come down to the level of the sphagnum moss, and the evening becomes small enough to hold. A pale green crown rises in front of you, no higher than a thumb joint, and in its center a cool bead of water rests without spilling, bright in the last low light. The surface under you gives a little, springy and wet, not like mud and not like grass, but like something quietly full. This is a fen, a peat-forming wetland, and at this close scale it does not open with a view. It opens with texture, a tuft, a hollow, a thread of water between tiny leaves. Beneath the fresh green tips there is already darker matter, older stems pressed down by many seasons of dampness. The softness of this evening has weight under it. What looks delicate on top is supported by a depth made slowly, a little at a time, by evenings very much like this one. Part of your attention still carries daytime habits. It wants the outline of the place. It wants to understand the whole wetland at once, to lift itself above the sedges and see where the water begins and where the moss ends. But the fen offers something smaller and steadier. The bead of water does not explain itself. It only sits in the moss head, held there by a structure too fine to notice all at once. And the longer you look, the less anything feels missing. Around it, other sphagnum tips gather close, pale at the newest growth, a little yellower lower down, then brown where older parts have already begun to sink into the held wetness below. Evening settles over all of it evenly. No one thing asks to be the main event. The fen does not hurry to introduce itself. It lets you come near first. As your attention stays close, the work of sphagnum moss begins to show in simple ways. The little heads are starry when seen from above, each one made of fine branching leaves that seem almost too soft to do much. Yet between them and inside them, water is held everywhere. What looks like a dry inch of surface is full of moisture. If your hand were to hover above it, you could imagine the coolness rising from that stored water, quiet as breath on glass. Tiny hollows between the hummocks are already darker than the crowns, their water carrying a tea tint, the clear brown of plant-stained wetland water. In a space no larger than your hand, the fen keeps more water than it first appears able to hold. That is one reason a peat-forming wetland can begin with something so modest. Sphagnum gathers and keeps wetness near the surface. It also changes the water around it, making conditions less easy for quick decay. Down here, where water lingers and air does not move far into the packed plant matter, broken stems and leaves do not vanish on schedule. They soften, darken, and remain. Near the moss, sedge stems lift in thin lines, plain and upright, giving the low surface a measure. Their lower bases vanish into the damp mat. Their tips still carry some of the evening light. Above them is open air, and below them this patient holding. When you let your view widen just a little, the fen at dusk is still mostly close work. The sedges are the first tall things to thin into silhouette, their green and straw colors giving way to olive, then brown, then dark lines against a dimming sky. Small patches of open water between mossy edges smooth themselves as the light lowers. Their surfaces stop catching detail and start gathering shadow. The air cooling over the wet ground brushes your skin lightly. It is not a chill that demands anything. It is simply the evening becoming more itself. Earlier there might have been a faint cloud of insects over the stems, visible only when they cross the light. Now even that soft motion begins to thin. The space above the fen clears without drama. What changes most at this hour is not the place itself, but how much it asks of your eyes. In brighter light, every tuft and blade calls for separate notice. At dusk, the details begin to combine. Distinct greens become families of green, brown water, dark peat, and the shadowed sides of hummocks come closer together in tone. The simplification is gentle. The fen is not losing itself. It is merely releasing some of its edges. A low hummock remains a low hummock. A narrow channel remains dark water, and the sedges continue standing where they have stood through wind, rain, and stillness alike. You do not need a fuller picture to stay with them. Fewer visible things can be a relief. The world at moss level does not become empty when the light declines. It becomes quieter to soar. Close to the surface, sphagnum stays faintly bright longer than many other plants do. The newest tips keep a soft pallor, as if holding on to the last of the sky. Lower down, where the stems are older and packed closer, the color deepens. You can almost read time by depth here. At the top there is living growth, still drinking in water, still extending by small increments. Just underneath are parts that were recently at the surface, now shaded, wetter, already beginning to collapse inward. Lower still, out of sight but easy to imagine in this wet place, are older layers with less air between them, darker and denser than the springy mat above. In the fen, the present evening rests on a long stack of former surfaces. This is the quiet center of peat. Season after season, something remains. Not everything, not cleanly preserved, just enough. A stem softened but not erased, a root fiber darkened and flattened. Fragments pressed together until the ground itself becomes a record of incomplete endings. What feels light and springy under the living green is supported by this darker store below. Seen in one evening, none of this is conspicuous. The moss does not visibly rise as you watch. The peat does not thicken by an amount your eyes could measure. What the mind at first wants to call stillness is not quite stillness. The earth under this moss is not waiting to begin. It has been beginning for a very long time. Once you understand that, the softness under you changes meaning. It is no longer only comfort. It is accumulation. The slight give of the sphagnum is the feel of a living surface laid over stored plant matter, and that matter is made from many ordinary days ending in ordinary ways. A warm dusk, a cooler dusk, rain settling, water rising a little then sinking, sedge stems growing and then leaning down, moss extending at the top while older portions below lose light and compress. You remain with the same patch of ground, yet it begins to feel broader in time. It is easy now to imagine other evenings laid beside this one, not in grand sequence, just in calm repetition. One dusk with midges faint above the stems, another with cooler air arriving sooner, another when the water in the hollows sat darker after a day of rain, another when the sphagnum was brighter at the top because the growth was fresh, another when the sedges were shorter or taller or beginning to dry at the tips. In each case the same patient pattern held. The moss gathered water, the water limited air. The lower parts sank into conditions where they did not fully return to loose fragments and open space. Little by little, the fen stored what the season left behind. There is a comfort in how ordinary that is. The closest thing to visible progress here is this spring under the moss and the dark density below it, both too quiet to announce themselves. The fen is trustworthy precisely because it does not announce itself. One surface replaces another. One season leans into the next. The peat below is what remains when quiet persistence is given room enough and water enough to hold. Dusk continues to narrow the world in kind ways. The sedges now are mostly lines, their edges softened until some seem to disappear into the same dimness that holds the water. The tiny hollows between hummocks become darker circles, still and reflective. A larger patch of open water nearby has turned from brown to nearly black, though now and then it holds a soft ribbon of sky along its surface. The cooling air settles lower across the fen and lingers close to the damp ground. Even the color of the sphagnum shifts from green toward a muted silver green where it catches what little light remains. You can still make out the crowns if you stay close. That is enough. The evening no longer offers many details at a glance, but the few it keeps are stable and clear. Reduced visibility does not make the fen uncertain. It makes it simple. A stem, a wet surface, a hummock with a shallow cup of water at its center, the dark line where living growth gives way to older, compressed material beneath. Each thing is easier to rest with because it no longer competes with everything around it. Somewhere above, the sky has faded through blue-gray into a deeper color, but down at moss height the change arrives as reflections. The tiny pool that looked tea-colored before now behaves like a mirror. It holds a dim patch of open sky, and later a point of brightness so small you might first mistake it for moisture. A single early star reflected in standing water is still only water and sky meeting. Nothing more is needed from it. The sphagnum remains close, damp, and faintly luminous in its own modest way. Water clings inside the little heads. The surface still yields, though more gently now that cooler air has calmed the topmost moisture. The fen feels gathered in. Sound has thinned with the light. There may still be a tiny living presence somewhere above the stems, but it is finer now, almost absorbed by the evening itself. No suddenness arrives. The sedges do not become mysterious. The water does not hide anything. Early night here is only a further easing of demand, a reduction in how much can ask for your notice. What remains is enough for a whole landscape: wet moss, dark water, upright stems, the stored depth below. By now your attention has changed its pace. At the beginning, it wanted a result from the fen, some neat understanding to carry away all at once. Now it is enough to stay near one sphagnum crown and know what supports it. Living green at the top, older plant matter beneath. The knowledge does not arrive like a conclusion. It settles in the way another layer of evening settles over the moss. You do not need to hold the entire process in mind at once. It is enough to feel the spring of the surface and understand that the spring has history inside it. The small bead of water you noticed at first is harder to distinguish now, but the hollow that holds it is still there. What was bright in dusk is now dark and steady, a tiny lens resting in the moss head. Around it, the pale upper leaves have gone soft in color, almost gray-green under the first true darkness. A little farther off, in a narrow pool between hummocks, that single reflected star remains. Near and far meet in the same few inches of fen. Surface water, skylight, deep peat below. The whole place continues in layers, not only downward into older plant matter, but upward into evening and then into night. Nothing closes. One condition simply settles over another. This is why the fen can feel so restful to remain with. Its form is built from continuation. The sphagnum moss keeps growing at the top while the lower parts sink and press together, and the peat below is not a separate world from the living surface. It is the same material carried into another stage by water, time, and the absence of quick finishing. Night now joins that pattern in its own thin way. It does not fall like a curtain. It lies down lightly across the sedges, across the open water, across the green crowns and the brown compressed layers beneath them. It is another ordinary covering, one more evening added to many others already held here. You can sense your breathing without trying to adjust it. It has simply grown less busy. The fen has been setting the pace all along, not by instruction but by example. Water held rather than rushing away. Stems standing without display. Growth measured in thin additions. Decay slowed into storage. Even the reflected star in the dark pool seems to wait without effort. In another place, waiting can feel hollow. Here it feels full, because the ground itself is proof that quiet time does not disappear unused. It gathers. It changes form. It supports what comes later. Under the living mat, countless former evenings remain as dark peat, pressed together so gradually that no single dust can claim the work. So you return, without moving, to the same close beginning. A soft surface, a little coolness held in a moss crown, a fen at the edge of night. The nearness that first seemed small now feels complete. You do not need a larger view. The sphagnum moss in front of you contains enough of the place to rest with. Water suspended among fine leaves, pale growth at the top, dimmer older parts beneath, and below them the deeper, darker continuity of peat. The sedges stand in shadow. The open water keeps its quiet mirror. The sky offers only a little light now, and that little light is sufficient. Early night settles over the fen as one more thin layer among many, and the wet ground accepts it the way it accepts everything else, by holding what it can, slowly, without display. The moss remains springy, the water remains cool. The peat below remains dark and stored. Somewhere in that layered softness are 1,000 evenings of growth and partial decay, of dimming sedges and still hollows, of surfaces living briefly in the light before sinking into the calm retention beneath. This evening joins them without announcement. The fen continues making itself under the quiet sky, and you remain with it at moss height, where the world has grown small, dark, wet, and enough. Thank you for spending this time with the night sky reader. May your night be peaceful. Until next time, rest well.